My name is Jefferson Cujo Robert Shirley. I'm my mother's only son. My mother and I always used to play this game where she would say, "Jeff, do you love me?" And when your mother asks me that, there's only one answer. But I always have to think about it, because whenever I would say yes, immediately she'd say, "Okay, then do me a favor. Reach this shelf for me, get this thing from the shelf." It was like an easy favor. One time she asked me to mow the lawn. If you've ever seen my parents' lawn, that's a 2-hour job. My mother had this way. She always wanted me to be the absolute best person I could be. And she had this way of getting me to be the absolute best person I could be. She would never force me to do anything, but she'd always have this kind of sly way. Like I got a full scholarship to college. People always say, "Well, how did you get a full scholarship to college?" And I said, my mother said one sentence to me. She said, "Work hard at school." And I worked so hard at school for my mother. That I feel like my mother paid for my college. But I want to talk more about my mother in my younger days. I don't think a lot of you were around my mother when we lived in Nigeria. Nigeria, to me, is my home. And my mother was so powerful in Nigeria. She was this really short woman who everybody looked up to. And whenever I walked around with my mother, I felt like I was walking with a giant. And because she was so well respected, I think people have like a little bit of a fear of my mother, you know, because you don't want to disappoint somebody who you respect a lot. But because I'm her son, there were times when I disappointed her. And I want to tell you so I'm going to talk for a long time. And there was one of these times where in Nigeria, all I wanted to do was play football or soccer, whatever you want to call it, all day long, and I would play and I would get just filthy dirty. And one day we had to go somewhere. My mother called, Cujo, come and take a bath. And so I went to this tap and I washed my feet off with no soap, just water. And I said, "I'm ready, let's go." And my mother gave me this look that I'll never forget. I've seen it many times. I've actually seen it now in my niece when they're just not happy. And the next thing I know, my mother had stripped my clothes off, thrown me in the tub, put me in the tub, and started scrubbing my body so hard that I remember thinking my skin was going to get off. And then she took me out of the bath, and I was still like, oh, mommy, you know, what are you doing? And then wherever we lived, it was very dry, so she put all this Vaseline on my body, and so I was this clean, shiny boy. And in all honesty, to this day, even this morning, when I take a bath, I always say, I hope I'm clean enough, because I'm worried that my mother's going to come in and scrub me. And in this past week, I really wish my mother could have come and scrub me. Another thing my mother was known for, and I'm sure a lot of you know about this, was my mother loved to bake. In Nigeria, she ran this bakery, Mama Cujo's Bakery, except that wasn't the name, that's just what people said. And that bakery was just such an important part of my life. I remember just hearing, she would bake cake, she used to make these little tea cakes in these cans, and I can hear the cans when you put them into the oven. I could see all the cans, so much margarine all over that house. And everybody knew my mother's cakes. You'd be walking through town, you'd see the cakes in the kiosks, and it always just made me so happy. And when we moved to the U.S., you can't really run a bakery out of your house in the U.S. There are laws. So she kind of stopped baking a little, and when I was about 14 or 15, I said, you know, Mommy, can you please teach me how to bake? And she looked at me like, you know, I don't know about this boy. But she taught me to bake. She was so patient. I can't tell you how many things I burned. There was a time I forgot to put flour in something, and I said I didn't know why it was liquidy. And she always would just give me this look like, oh no. But with time, I learned how to bake. And I would call my mother, you know, I called my mother every Sunday. And you know, every time I did something with baking, I would say, oh, I did this thing, I learned this thing, I showed this person this thing they used to show me. And she'd always just seem happy. And last summer I came to visit her. My father was out of town. Emily doesn't live with them anymore. And I said, let me make this zucchini bread for you. breakfast, lunch, dinner. And every time she'd eat, after a while, I was like, oh, I was making fun of her, saying, oh, you must really like that bread. And she'd say with her mouth full, oh, this bread is really good. And at the time, I thought it was funny, but looking back on it, that just meant so much to me. Because my mother has taught me everything I know about baking. And to have her be so happy about something I baked just meant the world to me. The very last good memory I have of my mother was in January. In January, she was starting to not be as well. But she was still, Emily said she was really energetic and everything. And it was the day before I moved on January 11th. I remember it was January 10th. And it was just me and my mother at home. My father was out of, I don't know where he was. Emily wasn't home. And I really wanted to make these cookies that she used to make when I was a boy in Nigeria. And I was like, oh, I really want to make those cookies. And so, she was making rock buns. Those of you from Ghana, you know rock buns. So I'm making these cookies, and everything's going well. And I start to roll the cookies. I'm thinking like, yeah, I'm doing a really good job, and she's not even helping me. And then as soon as she sees me rolling the cookies, she looks over at me and says, you're rolling it too thin. And I said, what do you mean I'm rolling it too thin? She's like, they're going to burn. You're rolling it too thin. And I said, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I can check it in the oven. It'll be fine. And then those cookies burn. But that was the last teaching. That was the last baking lesson my mother gave me. And I've tried to make those cookies since then. I have not been successful. I don't know if I'll ever be successful at making those cookies. And I realize I've lost my baking teacher. But I keep trying. I keep trying to be the best person I can be. Because that's all she did. And I hope that when I die, if I can get even half the people who came here today, I feel like I did a good job. I want to thank you, Mommy. I want to thank you for everything. And so I want to finish by asking all of you a question. Do you love my mother? Yes. Then I want you to do me a favor. I want you to join me in singing a hymn that she sang many times while we were baking. Because we shall overcome.